Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm George Jackson, Director of Events at Government Executive Media Group, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event, Managing the Future Workforce in a Hybrid Environment, brought to you by SAP. When working from home, federal employees still need to stay productive. Apart from the obvious, like kids or a reliable internet connection, what challenges to engagement and efficiency do those employees face? How do these traditionally close-knit teams collaborate when physically they've never been more isolated? We'll seek to answer these questions today. The good news is workforce solutions are more advanced than ever. They include new ways to communicate, collaborate, and secure the data being shared in your organization. Today, our high-powered panel will discuss how each of their agencies or organizations tackle these HR challenges in an evolving landscape. Joining me, a group of career SES professionals: Blair Duncan, Chief Human Capital Officer at the Department of Health and Human Services; Raymond Limon, Chief Human Capital Officer at the Department of the Interior; Jane Dada, Chief Human Capital Officer at NASA; Enio Velasco, VP of HR Strategy and Business Transformation at SAP North America. Team, thank you so much for being here. Let's start with you, Jane. What are you working on right now at the nexus of human resources, this sort of hybrid workforce future that we're discussing today?
Thanks, George. It's good to be here. It's a big question. Let me just start by saying I think that we're wrestling right now with really how to get going post-pandemic, which is not here yet, but we hope and believe that it's coming. And so though we have adopted a lot of changes to the way in which we work, a lot of remote work and telework during the pandemic, the question is, how do we move out of that and into a world in which we take advantage of that which we have already done? So it touches on things like corporate culture and team building, how we keep that up in a remote environment, also how we take advantage of the unbelievable array of talent across the nation, where if geography were not an issue anymore, we could actually take advantage of more talent than ever before. So that would be sort of, how do we walk out of this? How do we not go too fast? How do we take advantage of some of the things we see related to this? And then how do we position ourselves so that we don't have a solution that we think is going to hold us steady for 5 years when in fact it's sort of ever morphing? So how do we maintain a certain amount of flexibility in how many are on site versus not, and how we address employee interest in not being on site versus the more traditional approach of your duty station is on site? So those are some initial thoughts to get us going.
I love how you're just so glasses half full there too, Jane. Mr. Duncan, let me go over to you, sir. Same question. What are you working on at HHS at this nexus of human resources, hybrid workforce?
Well, Jane really kind of encapsulated everything I think that all government agencies are going through right now. It's more about how do we move from our current state, which is where we are with the majority of the workforce being in a telework capacity, to what the new normal is going to look like. And that's what we're all wrestling with. What is that new normal? How are we going to educate our employees and just the public in general? Is a new world for the federal government. It's not what we're used to. We have to retrain people. We have to think about how the work is going to be distributed now, things that we didn't think about in the past. So, and the other part that I think all of us are concerned about is the policies that are going to need to be implemented to ensure that can sustain this type of workforce in the future. Right now, we still have old policies that need to be addressed quickly so we can move smoothly into the new environment.
Yeah, and we'll get back to that policy point that you raised there a little bit later in our program too. I'd love to dig into that. Ray, Interior, somewhat unique in this conversation because even before the pandemic, your workforce was highly dispersed. How has this pivot to telework that both Jane and Blair pointed out here impacted you, and what are you working on at that nexus that we've talked about?
You bet. Thanks, George. And again, thank you for hosting today's event. I do think, just over a year ago when we were looking at this environment and we started to move into this pandemic, the immediacy, the triage of our employees certainly came first and foremost. So thinking strategically at that time, we didn't necessarily have the luxury to think about where we stand today. And as they do say, never let a good crisis go to waste. I do think that there's a new opportunity for us to flex our strategic muscles and meet the expectations of not only our employees, but applicants who are interested in joining the federal service, especially with the new administration and a reemergence on how public service can be useful and an antidote to many of our societal problems. We want to take advantage of that. And I think the Department of the Interior wants to be on the forefront of that. As you suggest, we are everywhere, with your National Park Service, the way we manage water and resources, and how we work with, the tribal lands across the country. We are in 2,400 locations. And the fact that in the federal government occupational series, there are 350 occupations across the federal government. Well, at the Department of the Interior, we have 350 occupations. So when I think about people coming into the government, I think, Department of the Interior is a great place, because if you could see yourself joining the government, you could certainly see yourself joining the Department of the Interior. So we do a lot of work outside, if you will. And so, and as you know, and this may be a little HR wonkish, but in 2010, under the Telework Enhancement Act, every agency had to take a hard look at what positions were telework eligible and which ones could lend itself to virtually work in a telework environment. So I think the government did press pretty hard during the last decade, but I think we have to press even harder now. So when we are building this ecosystem that has traditionally been around the building and how you interact with your brick and mortar environment, this pandemic has forced us to rethink that the ecosystem is now the employee. The systems now have to support the employee to perform their duties and meet the services of our citizens. So it's an exciting time. At the same time, as Blair noted earlier, the policies don't support or can be as agile as the needs that we need our workforce to shift into.
Two things there before I pivot over to Ennio. I love that phrase, ecosystem is now the employee. I'm going to use that here in the future, Raymond. And if you want to wonk out on HR, this is the spot to do it,
Well, I apologize to the audience already.
Ennio, you've heard from three Chicos here. What stands out to you? How does this comport with the work that you do in agencies across government? I mean, these problems that they're solving for now as they sort of plan for an uncertain future.
Yes, George, thank you. The responses really resonate with what we have heard with other agency leaders. A lot of the work has been focused on addressing the culture first, digitizing many of the processes that were primarily focused, like Raymond said, doing the work on a building, and then really preparing people to sort of work remotely, not only supporting them with IT, but really realizing that they may have different needs, and managers needed to perhaps get some additional training to become more effective. Because of isolation, that alone has hit everyone differently. Some people feel the need to spend time with others. Perhaps personality-wise, more introverts may be more comfortable working on their own, a bit more isolated. However, the extroverts are really craving the attention, and their performance might be tipping down a bit, so they may require a lot more assistance. And managers can get the upskilling necessary to do that, but technology is also very available to them to make sure that they facilitate that communication that the three leaders have made reference to.
Blair, because you brought up this point, and I want to get back to it because I think it's an incredibly important one. management and operational practices need to change. It sounds like to accommodate, on-site employees, remote employees. I'm thinking HR self-service, recruiting, onboarding, the list goes on and on. Could you sort of dip your toe back into that particular water for our audience and talk a little bit about some of the best practices for starting to make those changes?
Yeah, I think that goes back to it's the culture, and every organization, every agency has a culture. That culture has been uprooted by the pandemic. No longer can, we just had an executive order that came out that said, federal government, you will wear a mask on any federal government facility. And, oh, by the way, location for interior as well. Well, there are folks in the federal government who don't think that's the right policy, but that is the new policy. So it's changing the culture to say that it's okay to allow people to telework. You don't have to have the person right next to you to be to do the work at hand if that's what the job requires. So it's a cultural change, and it's also from an HR standpoint. It's in many agencies, HR is given the opportunity to provide training to new supervisors or that type of employee, team lead supervisor. And we need to change how we do that. No longer is it the employees right next to me. Now they are remote. Everyone's been remote for almost a year now, at least in portions of HHS. So it's changing the culture. It's changing the mindset. We at HHS have gone to some automation instead of where employees would have to request to go into the office to fill out forms and wet signatures. We can now do them digitally. So we're allowing for that. And every day we're getting more and more attuned to what we need to do to give the employees the flexibility so that they can stay remote, and train the supervisors and say, it's okay. And that's where it gets difficult sometimes, because there are some managers that do not want people to telework, regardless of a pandemic or not. They want them right there. And that's what we have to overcome. And it's going to take some time. But I think as a government, and with it, as Ray said, the new administration's focus on taking care of the employee first, I think we'll get there. I really do.
Jane, let's get back to talent here. You suggested that if agencies do this right, they could really come out ahead by taking advantage of, being able to hire new employees all across the country. In some cases, how has this pandemic impacted the hiring process? And, a few examples that I've heard: increased focus on social media. We've got virtual job fairs, maybe even the use of artificial intelligence in the screening process. How has NASA been handling the hiring process since last February or March?
Thanks, George. Well, I would say that for the most part, what it's done is it's helped us to accelerate things that we were already starting to do. And that's a good thing. So for instance, use of social media for recruiting is a path that we were already on, and that has accelerated. More and more of the hiring managers are willing to turn to social media and other methods for recruiting, and that's a good thing. I would say that perhaps a bigger shift that was directly resulting from the pandemic is this idea that we really need to look at what it means to have a duty. Where is the duty station, and can we be flexible? It's kind of what Ray was saying earlier about, we went through this back some years back on telework eligible positions. But I think we were probably as bold as we could have been at that time. And now, both because, technology is better and we can do more things remotely, but also because I think our mindset is starting to shift about, well, heck, we did 10, 12 months of work remotely for this kind of occupation series. Do we really need that to be on site? So really opening up the aperture for what could be remote, and therefore advertising positions with undetermined duty locations. And that really then captures a whole new set of people who would be interested in opportunities that otherwise might not. And so I think that is the biggest shift. I will say that this puts a lot of pressure on supervisors and hiring managers, and they're already under a lot of pressure because they got to get work done, they got to do their own work, manage their people. And so this idea of actually having a more dispersed workforce than perhaps they would have had absent the pandemic and these kind of future of work movements, that's tough. It's one thing in a crisis, it's another thing when you have a choice. So I see that moving in the direction of being more open. I don't think it will happen as much and as fast as perhaps I might like, but I think that's a bigger shift than even some of the other areas. I will also say that remote onboarding and offboarding are things that we have shifted to the degree that we can, and that is also helpful in supporting this idea that if you hired somebody in a state where we have no facilities, that we could actually help them onboard from a tactical point of view, and then also think about how it is that we get them to be part of the NASA family, if you will, without necessarily showing up in a work site on a regular basis. So those are all things that we're sort of to come, but I feel very optimistic that we will be able to shift some of our practices to accommodate. So,
And a lot of what Jane lays out there comes down to a word I'm sure this whole group has heard quite a bit recently, and that's communication. How agency leaders should be communicating goals to their teams, how should they be structuring these work hours, maybe even tracking career development. Sort of weigh in there about communication, how this pandemic has changed it, and maybe what Chicos across government or HR professionals across government could really start focusing on right now.
Yeah, thank you, George. Yeah, what Jane has mentioned, I think is important. I was trying to take some notes because there were a lot of little pearls there. The segmentation of the workforce is one of them, right? You need to take into account, I think that what I've heard so far from Blair, Ray, and Jane is you got to focus on the employee. And they are under really a lot of pressure, but they also have some desires and some needs. So you need to sort of realize that some are going to be completely remote, or they want to prefer to be remote. Others may want to be on site, and some might sort of want to be flexible, a mixture of the two. And so how do you go about servicing them well without leaving a group to feel that doesn't get the same attention? It's really important. So communicating to each group and realizing the differences. Training your managers to have pay a bit more attention perhaps to the folks who are not necessarily present, using technology to be reminded, to nudge them along the way in a busy day to connect with some members of their team will be helpful. We have luckily a lot of good technology that can help us to cascade down goals from one leader to their direct reports. And we have also a great technology to help us piece out goals across the year so that we can see progress in each of them, and we can have continuous performance conversations on how things are moving along. All that is helpful, but that needs to be accompanied with upskilling, again, to the manager. He or she needs to have an opportunity to be able to develop trust, create a safety space, and really enhance and make people feel comfortable to reach out to them when they need them.
And part of what you're getting at there is customer service. And Raymond, I'm going to put this next question to you because as Chico, Department of Interior employees are your customers. One important thing that we haven't talked about just yet is their mental, their emotional well-being. And this is a very trying time for pretty much everyone. How do you build a resilient workforce with all this going on, working for those customers?
Right, and you're absolutely right. First and foremost, mission first, people always, right? It's an often used term, but we do have to do that because our greatest resource, as you know, are our federal employees. They come to us with a range of challenges and also opportunities to share with. And it's kind of up to us as Chico leaders to make sure that there is that safe space for them to succeed in. And that is kind of part of what I think is going to be challenging for us moving forward, particularly as it relates to retention. Insofar that we've talked a little bit about us kind of pushing the needle, technology needle, and recruiting and onboarding people. I mean, you see a flag over my shoulder. Every federal employee takes an oath of service. Every federal employee has to do fingerprints, et cetera. And yet we were able to figure that out in a very short period of time, leveraging technology. But now that they are part of our workforce, I'm a little concerned about the haves and have-nots, meaning in a hybrid workforce, people will be coming back into the office. When we traditionally onboard people, they'll have that opportunity to walk the hallway, pop your head into an office, shake somebody's hand, and from time to time, even get invited out after work for a social occasion. What about our remote workers who we're going to see an increase in numbers, and yet their ability to have that type of orientation, have that opportunity for networking will be different, albeit we will be leveraging technology. Technology only enables our goals. It doesn't solve our problems. So it's something that I think as certainly human capital leaders, making sure we have a level playing field for promotion opportunities, career enhancement opportunities when we're dealing and managing in a hybrid workforce. So yes, safety first, keep them safe. But I'm also kind of concerned moving forward is how do we create that level playing field for all of our employees?
Team, we're getting close to the end of our discussion time here, so I'm going to shift into what I call the lightning round. Greatest challenge to managing a future workforce. This could be from a technological perspective. It could be from a performance or policy-based perspective. And Ennio, it looked like you were nodding vigorously as Raymond was making that last point there. So I'd like to start with you, just in case you want to dovetail off of what he said and mix in this challenge.
Yeah, thank you, George. Yeah, I was listening to Ray and I'm thinking we have technology solutions, apps that can actually make us aware of the people, their strengths, their capabilities, and their skills. And in the private sector, I mean, they're used more frequently, succession planning, I'm referring to. So you can have an opportunity to raise the visibility of your workforce, regardless of whether or not they're remote or not, and discuss there's opportunities for progression, career progression. So that is helpful. But again, technology can take you so much. People need to sort of act on it. And so again, there's an opportunity to sort of really focus on culture. And I think the more that we can do to find out how people are feeling about the impact of some of our programs, the more opportunity we're going to have to tweak them and maybe launch and create some new ones to kind of further improve the culture. And so in other words, I'm actually asking for maybe a polling opportunity to sort of get their input so that can help us kind of maneuver in this new world of a hybrid workplace.
Blair, same question to you. Big challenge going forward.
I think managing employee and supervisor expectations and change management of what the future looks like. How do we do that? So we don't disenfranchise anybody, and we make sure that everybody is actually, we have a mission. Every one of us has that mission. Now we have to balance that mission with a new work environment. And I think the change management components are the biggest challenge from my standpoint.
Well, Jane, I'd love to end with our optimist panelist here. So if you would talk challenges and leave our audience with one more of those pearls of wisdom.
Thank you, George. So what I would say is I think the biggest challenge is not changing the culture, but adapting our cultures to allow for the best of what this can do for us, both for the mission and for the workforce. And so I think we need to, along the way, make sure we do hear the voice of the workforce. And how do we do that in a way that it feels authentic, so that we know how it's going? That's one measure of whether we're making progress in adapting. And also, I think there's some debunking of myths along the way. So, for instance, this idea that people who are remote will never, ever, ever see anyone face to face that they work with is actually obviously not going to happen. And so, how do we leverage face to face opportunities so that the kind of networking and team building that would otherwise be done in, say, an office building or another kind of work site can actually occur even for remote workforce? So those are the kinds of adaptations that I think we need to be paying attention to and allow for programmatically to help this along. So those are my thoughts.
Well, Jane, Ennio, Blair, Raymond, thank you so much for your time. It's just great to get all this HR brain power all in one place. Up next, I'll talk with human capital pros from the Defense Digital Service, the U.S. Digital Service, and SAP about the steps they're taking to get teams ready for hybrid work environments. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
What experiences are you creating for your employees? Employees are everything to an organization. Everything. They determine whether you succeed or fail. Are you delivering experiences that set each person up for success based on who they are and what they need? Are you helping them work to live instead of live to work? Human experience management means putting your people and their experiences ahead of everything so that they can experience more. Whether we are taking charge of everyday change or once-in-a-lifetime change, experience is the most valuable thing you can offer. When employees can do and be their best, your organization can also do and be its best, and everyone wins. Your team, your company, your world. Now more than ever, experience wins. This is Human Experience Management.
Welcome back to Managing the Future Workforce in a Hybrid Environment, brought to you by SAP. We're learning about some of the next steps federal, civilian, defense, and private sector organizations are taking to optimize their workforce, both for collaboration and for efficiency. Here now, Andrea Visa, Director of Talent at the U.S. Digital Service, Katie Olson, Deputy Director at DDS, and Angelique Slagle, Head of Human Experience Management at SAP North America. Team, you just heard from our wonderful group of Chicos about what they're working on at the nexus of human resources, hybrid workforce right now. Andrea, I'd love to start with you. USDS, you have such a scope across all of government. What are you guys working on?
So much. And so I know Jane in the previous session mentioned focus on culture. So, we always have required people to relocate to DC to join us for short tours of service. So, 6 months to 4 years. And now we have the great ability to hire people all over the country, onboard them remotely. It's amazing. However, how do you translate that unique cultural experience that people are only going to have for a short period of time virtually? So that's really what my team has focused on, and also just our whole organization, and just trying to make sure that we can translate, this great tour in public service virtually to make sure that people catch that civic tech bug and continue the good work.
Well, let's hope this program contributes to that. Katie, dovetail off of that, what problems are you solving for right now at DDS as you plan for this uncertain future?
Yeah, it's a great question. As Andrea said, we have tried to tap into, use this opportunity to tap into talent from all over the country. So we have 3 locations. We have our location at the Pentagon, we have a location at Fort Gordon in Augusta, Georgia, and we have a location in San Francisco. related to the Defense Innovation Unit. So one, it's been an opportunity to take advantage of hiring talent into all of those locations, even if they're not going into them right now. Two, it's an opportunity for us to think about our cyber hygiene and making sure that everyone has the tools and resources that they need to be productive in a remote environment. So making sure that we have multi-factor authentication, everyone has a VPN, everyone has a work profile, sort of all of those different tools and services. And three, we've tried to extend those practices to the rest of the Defense Department. So in the beginning of the pandemic, DoD's plan was to sort of do a hiring freeze because they typically rely on a pretty manual and in-person process to onboard employees. And we intervened and offered to set them up with different types of laptops and equipment, Slack, Gmail, things like that. And as a result, the DoD has been able to onboard over 1,000 employees since the beginning of the pandemic. So we've been, been able to help extend some of those practices to the rest of the department as well.
Well, thank you. Angelique, I'm going to pivot over to you. And I saw and was just amazed that you're so good at this virtual medium. You pivoted over, you closed your window, you came back, and here you are. We're talking about this nexus of human resources and the hybrid workforce, and you're a shining example here, being able to walk and chew gum at the same time. What is SAP working on here? We heard a few things from NEO addressing the culture first, segmentation of the workforce, a focus on employee needs. Build off of what he said. Give us a little bit more.
Thanks, George. And yes, I've become an expert at Zoom meetings. So I can talk a little bit about what we're doing at SAP, but also what we're doing to support our SAP customers. And they actually overlap quite a bit. They fall into three areas: defining employee experience through task experience, social experience, and fulfillment experience. And so the first is around creating a great task experience. And this is about making sure people have the tools to do their job. Technology is important. It's super critical in a hybrid environment, but instead of going to offices, we're going to log into systems. And if a system doesn't work or is hard to use, then it's like going into an office with bad plumbing, poor lighting, or locked doors. And so at SAP, we're investing in things like SAP WorkZone, which is a platform that enables access to everything you need to do in your job in one single place. We also are integrating SAP solutions, which a lot of our customers use to do their day-to-day function, with tools like Microsoft Teams that allow, have become really people's online meeting rooms. The second area is around building better social experiences. And this is really about making people feel more connected to one another at work, make sure that they're included and cared about. Isolation is a big concern for us in SAP and our customers as well. And we heard in the earlier comment about that and how isolation potentially can prohibit someone from being promoted or moving into the next step, next role. And so there's some good things with remote work. It reduces a lot of barriers or corporate office politics, but we want to make sure that we provide tools that keep people connected, but also mentally healthy. And so we do that by allowing online learning communities where you can connect with people who've had similar challenges, tools that connect you to mentors, or also manage your own personal well-being and mental health. The last one is around that sense of fulfillment. And it's really about making sure that people feel that the work that they do matters and is valued. And it's here where the frontline manager plays a really critical role, especially in a hybrid environment. They are now the human face to that employee. Technology is cool, and as you also heard, it only enables, but it can't care for a person. Only person-to-person connection is really how people will feel appreciated. So what we've been doing is really a focus around continuous performance management solutions, right? So that we allow that through constant conversation through a manager and employee, you can feel really valuable, as well as appreciation through informal badges or cash rewards.
Katie, we talked with the previous group about management and operational practices that need to change to accommodate this pivot to telework. I'd like to turn that on its head for a second. Something in your initial remarks stood out to me, and that's your focus on cyber hygiene. There are things that need to change, but there are also things that need to be contiguous from pre-pandemic times. How do you, as the Deputy Director of DDS, balance that for your team?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are certainly a number of tools and systems, particularly within the DoD, that we're seeing I think there's been an increasing need to see, what they look like for a remote force, particularly different types of classified networks and classified systems. And I think we've seen increased demand for those systems to be, accessible, particularly the SIPR network, to be accessible for employees in a remote environment. And so I think, the pandemic has certainly put pressure on, what it looks like to have access to those outside the building. And certainly, we have our employees driving to, different bases around the country to be able to access those. So I think that's, becoming something that's going to hopefully be a focus as a result of the pandemic. But at the same time, we can't lose our focus on sort of safety and security. And I do hope that, as the department shifts to some of these more, more sort of remote and, mobile tools, that we don't lose that. It's certainly a trade-off, going back to the sort of experience of onboarding remote employees. It's very manual currently and very paper-based. There's a numbered form for everything you need to do, from, sort of parking to employee benefits. And those are all things that can be, easily digitized. And I hope this is, enough of an impetus to push us towards that. But, as we, rely on cloud-based infrastructure, as we rely on, employees all over the country, we have to think about what that means from a security posture.
Andrea, where does emerging technology come into this discussion? I mean, your team at USVS, I sort of see them as kind of IT ninjas that can pop into agencies and pop out and lend their expertise in there. We talked a little bit about artificial intelligence earlier. What's the state of the art emerging tech-wise in this HR arena we're talking about today?
So whenever I like to talk about technology within government, I think it's not emerging, but just catching up with the private sector, because, prior to the pandemic, no one knew what Zoom was, or it was very difficult to even access it on your federal computer. So things like that were really challenging and barriers. We've been utilizing Slack for about 2.5 years now, but that has been an uphill battle. And because we had that in place, as we pivoted to this remote environment, I mean, that was just, I can't imagine what the type of, how many emails I would have in my inbox if that was not in place, not fun. And so I think this has really been a pivotal moment for federal government to understand that you don't have to accept this is the way we've always done it, because it is 2021, 2020, we need to make changes to accommodate the world that we're living in. And just because, submitting your HR paperwork, like Katie said, via paper, you have to have a wet signature. It doesn't make sense anymore, but just making sure that we have the technologists at the table, assisting with those decisions being made, and making sure that, that security is being met, as well as just accommodating the type of lifestyle and work environment that the government needs to apply to be competitive with the private sector.
Angelique, Andrea makes an interesting point there, and it's one, we've heard before about some agencies, organizations inside government are behind the curve by a year or two from their private sector counterparts. So that emerging technology question, I'd also love to hear from you. What are agencies not necessarily taking advantage of right now to help manage this future workforce that they could be?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because when I was listening, I was thinking, there's so many self-service technology out there that we offer and many companies do to really help not only the remote workforce, but, even if you're in person. And one of those is around onboarding and training. When you are coming in as a new employee, instead of being kind of heavily reliant on your manager to kind of walk you through the office, we provide tools that give you a list of people in advance to speak to aligned with your role so that they can help you get started on your very first day, feel a sense of community. But we also allow automated those individuals to know that you're starting, that they should expect a reach out. And so that way they're not surprised. So that's just one small way that in the onboarding process, we're able to completely automate that completely, as well as create a human connection for that employee so they have the best experience on day one.
Andrea, I wonder if you might follow up on that one. Seems like it's in your wheelhouse there.
Yeah, certainly. And I love to talk about employee experience. So Angelique, everything you're saying is making me very excited. And I wish we had an automated process. Everything we do is very manual. But our team has really focused on expanding our onboarding program. So, making sure that there are continuous touch points within different people within the organization, on their project teams, within their communities of practice. Additionally, we've pivoted to a 3-day virtual onboarding experience and orientation experience added to that onboarding experience because it's so much more than one day to make sure that they understand the context of, this is their first time working in government. That is very confusing if you don't know all the acronyms right out the gate, and some cultural orientation as well. And so just different pieces to meet and get acquainted with the organization. And I think it's super helpful. And I think it goes back to just that focus on the employee and how they can best perform. And especially in that remote environment, you need to ensure that you're going above and beyond to make people feel included within your organization.
Katie, both of your fellow panelists now talked a bit about inclusion here. I think Angelique, she said isolation is a big concern. It even has the potential to hinder promotion. How do you address this within DDS? How do you sort of combat that in the environment we're in right now?
Yeah, it's certainly challenging. We had the advantage that we are a distributed workforce before the pandemic. So we have been used to this model of a virtual stand-up every Monday with everyone dialing in. So in some ways, we had a bit of an advantage because we were used to people dialing in from multiple locations. But I think those rituals have become particularly important. So, the ritual of a weekly stand-up, a once a month project review. I mean, something we used to do in person once a month was run our entire project list, 20 projects or so top to bottom. And, we made a decision, we need to keep doing those things even virtually to kind of keep some sense of routine and normalcy for everyone. We've tried to do sort of, brunches and happy hours and things like that. We've done a buddy system, things like that to make sure that everyone, as Andrea said, everyone is feeling really cared for throughout the process. And I will also say, in light of the events of the past year, not just the pandemic, but I think what we've seen in terms of the tension, the sort of racial tension that we've seen across the country, it's been really important to address those issues. We've placed a particular emphasis on diversifying our staff, but diversifying is really part of the recruitment process. Inclusion is what happens when people are on the team, and do people feel welcome? Are we elevating everyone's voices? Are we making sure that everyone feels welcome, and then there's a place to have some of these tough conversations that are taking place all over the country. So we've made sure to put a particular emphasis on having those conversations as a team as well, particularly in light of everything that's occurred within this past year.
Andrea, let's stay with that for a little bit, if we could. The Biden administration, diversity, equity, and inclusion is kind of built into its DNA. I mean, it's one of the top stated goals from President Biden himself. Where does that fit into this inclusiveness conversation at U.S. Digital Service?
Yes, I love that question. And I think that's what's so exciting about this new administration is the focus to really address these issues head on. And then specifically at USDS, we have been doing a lot of work internally. So one thing, our team, we have a robust internal recruiting team that just focuses on reaching out to underrepresented groups and minorities. And so you have a stronger likelihood of actually passing our interviewing process if you are recruited and sourced by one of our recruiters. So that's something that they just focus on exclusively. And then also we are currently in the process of doing a pay equity evaluation. And so with that, it's also updating how the government reports and collects that information, which we've come to realize doesn't accurately reflect our workforce. So, that is something that I'm very excited about and should have some findings kind of coming out in the next few weeks. But one thing that I like to say is that, this is something that we talk about internally, focused on working on all the time outside of just attending diverse conferences and that recruitment piece that I mentioned, but we're not great. We can always be doing better. And I think just recognizing that there's always something to be done and to be a little bit better than you were the day before is like the best way to approach this. But I'm really excited to see what type of initiatives the Biden administration has and how we can help facilitate in any way to make this a more equitable government and country.
Angelique, follow up to that on the DEI discussion here, just so we get kind of a round robin perspective, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, I mean, it's very exciting. And one of the ways that I see technology being able to enable that is through recruiting. And one of the things that the pandemic did shine a light on is the fact that you can now recruit talent from anywhere. You're more open to the fact that the person doesn't necessarily have to be in that same city and be able to locate, to commute to the office. And so that opens up such a greater pool of resources, but also allows you to use tools like machine learning in recruiting that reduces this implicit bias by using more empirical methods to source candidates versus a recruiter's intuition. And so when you use these tools effectively, you can find people that you may have never considered in the traditional hiring process. And this can directly help you increase your diversity of people, minorities, or disabled communities that might have historically been overlooked, as well as increasing the connection again with that candidate throughout the process of using chatbots, so they start to get a sense of what that organization or government agency is really like, and they want to work there.
Well, team, we are getting close, sadly, to the end of this conversation. So let's do that lightning round robin with this group as well. And Andrea, since I just saw you clapping, we're going to you first here. Greatest challenge to managing the future workforce could be from a technology perspective or a performance policy perspective. Just take it whatever way you want.
Ooh, performance policy. I mean, I think that's a hard question because also, you know, whenever people are working remotely, so many other factors go into what they bring to work. So if they have family, if they are alone and isolated, and just the varying feelings and emotions that this entire year has brought. So really, I think that's the importance of connecting with your employees on your team, friends within the organization is super important to make sure people don't feel isolated, which I think goes back to what was said earlier.
Katie, same question to you. Greatest challenge?
I think the greatest challenge for us will be, you know, continuing to recruit from, you know, from all parts of the country. You know, we have a model of 2-year terms where we bring in people for, you know, 2 years with the idea that we're bringing in the sort of latest, greatest tech talent. You know, and continuing to, you know, in a pandemic where we don't have the, you know, the advantage of sort of in-person, you know, traveling to these cities, meeting people at conferences, continuing to get the word out about all the great work that the federal government is doing and encouraging people to come be part of it. You know, I talk a lot about if you're someone who's, you know, a technologist who's interested in transportation or logistics or public health, you know, the federal government is has the biggest of all of those systems and the most complex. So if you want to learn complexity or how to scale, what an awesome opportunity to do that. So I think the biggest challenge for us will be telling that story and continuing to recruit despite not having the advantages of sort of in-person, face-to-face connection.
Thanks for letting us help tell that story today, Katie. It's great. Angelique, you got the final word here.
All right. The biggest challenge, I think, is getting leaders to change their mindset. You know, what we learned in 2020 is that moving to a hybrid work model could have happened a long time ago. In less than 4 weeks, you know, thousands of organizations moved millions of people to remote work. And while there were challenges, it really went smoothly. And we also learned that technology can support that employees want that flexibility, and that they, for the most part, can be more productive. So leaders need to be comfortable, and leaders were comfortable with how things were, and they didn't really challenge themselves. So as leaders, you know, we need to continue to stay committed to doing the right thing, and allowing the use of technology to get our teams to be effective, but also, again, feeling that connection with our employees.
Great place to close it. Andrea, Katie, Angelique, thank you so much for taking the time for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And a big thanks to our sponsor, SAP, for making events like this possible. Thank you, the audience, for tuning in. Be sure to check out the Content Hub on this website to learn more about some of the great work SAP is doing in managing the future workforce in a hybrid environment. For Government Executive Media Group, I'm George Jackson.